The Architecture of the Great Distraction, Charlie Kirk, the Culture War Hoax, and the Century-Long Defense of Racial Hierarchy, or how white people have been running the same scam for 115 years and still think we don't notice. Introduction: The Function of Manufactured Outrage. Look, I need to tell you something about Charlie Kirk. On September 10th, 2025, in Orem, Utah, somebody killed Charlie Kirk. And before we go any further, let me be clear. Political violence is wrong. Murder is wrong. I don't care how much you disagreed with the man. Killing him was wrong. We good? Okay. Now, here's what happened next. And if you've been paying attention to how white supremacy works in America, you already know exactly what happened next. The entire conservative media apparatus, from the Heritage Foundation to whatever the hell they're calling Twitter this week, immediately started the canonization process. Saint Charlie of the Culture War, martyr for free speech, defender of Western civilization. They have the hagiography written before his body was cold. But here's the thing, and this is the thing I need you to understand. Charlie Kirk spent his entire career manufacturing outrage. That was his job. That was his whole business model. Take something that sounds scary, make white people think it's coming for them specifically, collect donations, repeat. He was a chaos merchant, and now, in death, he's being used for one last round of manufactured outrage. They're going to use his assassination to justify everything he stood for, which is wild considering what he actually stood for. So we need to talk about what Charlie Kirk actually did, and to do that, we need to talk about something bigger. We need to talk about the culture war. Now, you think the culture war is about pronouns and Dr. Seuss books, and whether Aunt Jemima should be on syrup bottles. That's what they want you to think. That's the cover story. But the culture war has never been about culture. It's been about race. Specifically, it's been about maintaining white supremacy by making white people think they're under attack. Let me say that again for the people in the back. The culture war is a hoax. It's not a debate. It's not a legitimate disagreement about values. It's a sophisticated con game that's been running for over a century, and Charlie Kirk was just the latest person dealing the cards. The game works like this. Whenever black people get a little bit of visibility, a little bit of power, a little bit of dignity, white supremacy manufactures a crisis to push them back down. And they've been running this exact same play since 1910. I'm about to show you the receipts. For over a decade, Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA, and yes, I'm going to keep calling it TPUSA because that's how you say it and it sounds ridiculous, radically radicalized a generation of white conservatives. And I don't mean they taught them about tax policy. I mean they taught them to see black people existing in positions of authority as an existential threat. They taught them to see queer people being visible as an assault on their way of life. They taught them to see accurate history as anti-white propaganda. Kirk didn't invent these fears. White supremacy has been selling these fears from forever. What Kirk did was industrialize them. He took boutique racism and turned it into Amazon racism. He took the great replacement theory from the neo-Nazi forums where it belonged and polished it up for the podcast circuit. He took the bell curve pseudoscience that says black people are genetically dumber and made it into talking points about DEI hires. But here's what I'm going to prove to you. The rhetorical strategies Charlie Kirk used in the 2020s are the exact same strategies white supremacists used to attack Ed Sullivan in the 1950s, which are the exact same strategies they used to attack Jack Johnson's boxing films in 1910. Same play, different jersey. And we know this because Netflix just dropped a documentary called Sunday Best, The Untold Story of Ed Sullivan. And if you watch it, you realize that the sponsors who tried to cancel Ed Sullivan for booking too many black performers in 1955 were the same energy as the people trying to cancel Bud Light for hiring a trans woman in 2023. Same pressure tactics, same language about protecting values and standards, same bullshit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay out exactly how this scam works, show you the pattern across 115 years of American history, and prove to you that the culture war is not a war at all. It's a protection racket for white supremacy. The war has never been about culture. It's always been about who owns the country. All right, so let's talk about Charlie Kirk himself, because to understand the con, you have to understand the con artist. Charlie Kirk didn't start out as a full-blown white nationalist. That's important. He evolved, and that evolution tells you everything about how the culture war works in 2025. When Kirk first showed up on the scene, he was basically young Republican Ken doll. Fiscal responsibility, limited government, free markets, all the Reagan talking points delivered with a smile and a flag pin. This was Charlie Kirk 1.0, and he was basically harmless. He was the kind of conservative your parents' generation was used to, the kind who argues about marginal tax rates and doesn't scare the horses. But then something changed. Over several years, Kirk's rhetoric hardened. It darkened. It went from "we need lower taxes" to "they are replacing you," from limited government to "the Civil Rights Act was a mistake," from fiscal conservatism to blood and soil white nationalism. And I need you to understand, this wasn't a breakdown. This wasn't radicalization in the traditional sense. This was a strategic pivot. See, as the country got browner and less white, the old talking points stopped working. You can only run on tax cuts for so long when your base is more concerned about demographic change than marginal rates. So Kirk adapted. He gave the people what they wanted. And what they wanted was permission to be afraid of Black people existing in spaces of power. The assault on the Civil Rights Act, the freedom of association Trojan horse. Okay, this is where Kirk really showed his whole ass, so pay attention. For decades, Republicans played this game where they claimed to love Martin Luther King Jr. They'd quote that one line, you know the one, judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and they'd use it to attack affirmative action. They'd say, "We're the real anti-racists. We want colorblindness. It's the Democrats who are obsessed with race." It was bullshit, but it was useful bullshit because it let them oppose civil rights policies while claiming to support civil rights principles. Charlie Kirk said, "You know what? I'm tired of pretending." In the years before his death, Kirk repeatedly and explicitly said that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a huge mistake. Not just some parts of it, not just the implementation, the whole thing. He called it a legislative beast that had been weaponized into an anti-white weapon. Let me make sure you understand what he just said. The Civil Rights Act, the law that made it illegal to refuse service to Black people at lunch counters, the law that ended legal segregation, the law that opened up housing and employment to millions of Americans who had been systematically excluded, Charlie Kirk called that law a beast that hunts white people. That's not a dog whistle, that's a foghorn. And here's how he justified it. He used this libertarian freedom of association argument. It goes like this. If I own a restaurant, I should be able to serve whoever I want. The government forcing me to serve Black people violates my property rights. That's tyranny. You see how slick that is? He's using the language of freedom to defend segregation. He's taking rights talk and using it to justify discrimination. It's the same argument segregationists made in the 1960s, except now he's calling it libertarianism instead of states' rights. And here's what this argument really means. If you let private businesses discriminate, you're not creating freedom. You're creating economic apartheid. Because when white people control most of the businesses and they all decide they don't want to serve Black people, then Black people can't get bank loans, can't stay in hotels, can't eat in restaurants, can't get medical care. The freedom of white business owners becomes the imprisonment of Black citizens. But Kirk and his followers don't want to think about that part. They want to think about the hypothetical tyranny of the government making them treat black people like human beings. Now, let me break down Kirk's specific inversions, because this is where the magic trick happens. This is where white supremacy turns reality inside out. Inversion number 1, the beast. Kirk says the Civil Rights Act created a federal bureaucracy that persecutes white people. In reality, the act dismantled the actual bureaucracy of Jim Crow state terror. You know, the system where state governments enforced segregation with the force of law and police enforced whites-only spaces with violence. That was the real beast. But Kirk wants you to believe the law that ended that beast is the beast itself. That's some Inception-level inversion right there. Inversion number 2, freedom of association. Kirk says businesses should have the right to serve who they want. Translation, white people should be able to create complete economic monopolies where black people are locked out of the entire economy. But he calls it freedom. Freedom for who, though? Not freedom for the black person who can't get a loan, not freedom for the black family that can't rent an apartment, freedom for white people to maintain white-only spaces. That's the freedom he's talking about. Inversion number 3, anti-white weapon. Kirk claims anti-discrimination laws are used to punish white excellence. The reality, these laws are the only thing stopping employers from only hiring white people. Study after study shows that when you send identical resumes with white-sounding names and black-sounding names, the white names get more callbacks. The laws don't punish white excellence, they try to stop discrimination. But Kirk flips it so his audience thinks white people are the victims. Inversion number 4, racism is gone. This might be his most audacious lie. Kirk declared that racist sentiments have gone away. Just straight up said racism is over, we solved it, nothing to see here. Which is convenient, because if racism is over, then we don't need civil rights laws anymore, right? It's like declaring cancer cured so you can stop chemotherapy. It's declaring victory so you can abandon the fight. And here's why all these inversions matter. They let Kirk's audience see themselves as victims instead of beneficiaries. They get to feel oppressed instead of privileged. They get to feel like they're fighting for freedom instead of defending hierarchy. And when you believe you're the victim, you can justify any response. The mainstreaming of the Great Replacement. All right, if the attack on the Civil Rights Act was the shield, the Great Replacement theory was the sword. And this is where Kirk really earned his white supremacist credentials. The Great Replacement theory, for those who don't know, goes like this. There's a conspiracy by elites, and when they say elites, they mean Jews, but sometimes they say globalists or Democrats or Marxists as a substitute, to replace white people with non-white immigrants. Why? To ensure permanent liberal political control. White people vote conservative. Brown people vote liberal. So if you replace white people with brown people, Democrats win forever. This theory originated in neo-Nazi forums. It was created by white nationalists who were explicitly white nationalists. And Charlie Kirk's job was to take this neo-Nazi conspiracy theory and make it palatable for suburban moms. He did this by removing the explicit anti-Semitism, kind of, and reframing it as voter importation. He'd say things like, the Great Replacement strategy is a strategy to replace white rural America with something different. He accused the Biden administration of actively working to diminish and decrease white demographics. Now listen to that language. Not demographics are changing. That's neutral. He said white demographics are being diminished and decreased. By whom? By the government. Intentionally. It's not a natural process. It's an attack. And here's where the hoax comes in. Demographic change is real. Birth rates are falling among all wealthy populations regardless of race. People migrate for economic opportunity. The American population is becoming more diverse. These are facts. But Kirk takes those facts and turns them into an invasion narrative. He uses war language, invasion, replacement, conquest. He activates survival instincts. He makes his audience believe this isn't demographic change, this is demographic warfare. Someone is trying to erase you. The hoax says they're bringing people in to steal your country. The reality is, people are coming for the same reasons people have always come to America. Jobs, safety, opportunity, the American dream, remember that? But the truth doesn't radicalize people. The truth doesn't drive clicks. The truth doesn't make millions of dollars. The lie does, and the lie has consequences. The Buffalo Shooters Manifesto cited replacement theory. The El Paso Shooters Manifesto cited replacement theory. When you tell people they're being replaced, some of them are going to pick up guns and try to stop it. That's not a side effect. That's a feature. The violence is the point. It keeps the invaders scared. It keeps the base energized. It keeps the machine running. The incompetence myth, black pilots, and the DEI boogeyman. Okay, this is my favorite part because it's the dumbest and also the most revealing. In the final phase of his career, Kirk became obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with the competence of black professionals. Specifically, he was terrified of black pilots. He said, and this is a direct quote, "If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified." Let me repeat that. If Charlie Kirk saw a black pilot, his first thought was not, cool, a pilot. His first thought was, I hope this person knows how to fly a plane. Because in Kirk's mind, black pilots are suspect. They might be DEI hires who can't actually do the job. They might be there because of affirmative action, not because of ability. And therefore, having a black pilot is a safety risk. This is 19th century scientific racism repackaged for the podcast era. It's the bell curve with a microphone. It's phrenology for people who listen to Joe Rogan. The logic goes like this. Historically, 95% of pilots were white men. Therefore, that distribution must represent the natural distribution of talent. White men must just be naturally better at being pilots. So if black people start becoming pilots at higher rates, it can't be because we removed discriminatory barriers. It must be because we lowered standards. Let me hit you with some facts that Kirk doesn't want you to know. Fact 1. There is zero statistical evidence correlating diversity initiatives with airline accidents. None. Zero. The U.S. aviation system is literally the safest in the world. Planes are safer now than they've ever been. And notably, accident rates were higher back when the cockpit was all white and all male. If Kirk's theory were true, if diversity meant unqualified pilots, we should see accidents going up. But we don't. We see the opposite. Fact 2, as of 2025, the airline industry is still 92% white and 95% male. Black women, the group Kirk seems most worried about, make up 0.1% of pilots. 0.1%. So this takeover Kirk is scared of, it's mathematically impossible. There aren't enough black pilots to take over anything. This is a fantasy. Fact 3, the FAA didn't lower standards. They changed their testing to better correlate with actual job performance. That's not lowering standards, that's improving standards by testing for the right things. So why is Kirk so scared of black pilots? It's not about safety. It was never about safety. It's about ontological security. Stay with me here. For white supremacy to work psychologically, white men have to be the protectors, the experts, the ones in control. That's not just about power, that's about meaning and identity. The white man saves, the white man knows, the white man is competent. Now imagine you're on a plane and the pilot is a black woman. That disrupts the entire narrative. It says intelligence and expertise are not the exclusive property of white men. It says black women can master complex systems. It says the hierarchy might be a lie. And that's terrifying to people invested in the hierarchy, not because planes will crash, but because their worldview will crash. Kirk's safety concerns were a mask for the terror of black competence. Because once you admit a black woman can fly a plane as well as a white man, what else might she be equally good at? Leading a company? Leading a country? Once you admit merit isn't racially distributed, the entire justification for racial hierarchy collapses. The abandonment of MLK. One more thing before we move on, and this one is important because it shows where the culture war is going. For decades, conservatives loved Martin Luther King Jr. Well, not the real Martin Luther King Jr., the sanitized version, the one-line version, content of character, not color of skin. They used that line like a weapon against affirmative action in any race-conscious policy. They'd say, "We're following MLK's dream. We want colorblindness. It's the left that betrayed him." It was always bullshit, but it was useful bullshit because it let them claim the moral high ground of the civil rights movement while opposing everything the civil rights movement fought for. But Charlie Kirk decided he was done pretending. He got caught on tape calling MLK awful, not a good person, and a mythological creation. He said elevating King to a national hero was a mistake because King talked about race all the time. You see what happened there? Kirk's complaint about Martin Luther King Jr., the man who led the civil rights movement, is that he talked about race too much. That's like complaining a heart surgeon talks about hearts too much. But this abandonment of MLK is significant. It means the culture war isn't even trying to co-opt civil rights anymore. It's not trying to claim we're the real anti-racists. It's openly rejecting civil rights as a concept. It's saying maybe segregation wasn't that bad. Maybe the civil rights movement was a mistake. Maybe we need to go back. That's not just a new argument. That's a new phase, and it's dangerous. The historical mirror, Sunday Best, and the Ed Sullivan precedent. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because I'm about to show you that everything I just described about Charlie Kirk, it's not new. It's the same playbook white supremacy has been running for over a century. And we know this because of a Netflix documentary about Ed Sullivan. Yes, Ed Sullivan, the stiff old white guy who introduced the Beatles. That Ed Sullivan. Turns out he was a civil rights pioneer, and white supremacists tried to cancel him for it. And the tactics they used in 1955 are identical to the tactics used in 2025. Same con, different decade. Ed Sullivan as the original DEI target. If you're under 40, you probably don't know who Ed Sullivan was. He hosted a variety show called The Ed Sullivan Show, and it was one of the most watched programs in American television history. He was the ultimate establishment figure, suit and tie, stiff on camera. He seemed like the personification of 1950s white bread America. But here's what the Netflix documentary Sunday Best reveals. Ed Sullivan used his massive platform to normalize black presence in American homes. He didn't just book one black act a year as a token. He booked the Supremes, the Temptations, Nat King Cole, Pearl Bailey. He put them on as headliners. He treated them as legitimate stars. He had them on his show regularly. And for doing this, he got the exact same treatment Charlie Kirk gave to DEI initiatives 70 years later. The threat was the same. Just like Kirk said black pilots threatened safety, 1950s critics said black performers threatened the moral fiber of the nation. Seeing black people on television, particularly black people being celebrated and applauded, would corrupt white children. It would undermine white authority. It would encourage race mixing. It would destroy America. Notice, it's always destroying America. That's always the claim. The reaction was intense. Sullivan received thousands of angry letters, and I mean thousands. People were so mad they sat down with pen and paper and wrote hate mail. They didn't complain about the plate spinners or the comedy acts. They complained about the black performers. They said things like, "Why is Ed Sullivan on TV?" They attacked him personally. They called him a cigar store Indian, which was a racist joke suggesting he was as mindless as a wooden statue. They weren't just disagreeing with his programming choices. They were trying to destroy his career to stop black people from appearing on television. the mechanism of sponsor censorship, the original cancel culture. Now, here's where it gets really good, because modern conservatives love to talk about cancel culture like it's some new leftist invention, like the idea of using economic pressure to silence people was invented by Twitter mobs in 2015. The Sunday Best documentary proves that's a lie. Cancel culture was invented by white supremacists. It was their primary weapon for enforcing segregation in the media age. Here's how it worked. Sullivan sponsors, particularly the Lincoln Mercury dealers in the South, threatened to pull their advertising if he continued to book so many black acts. Not any black acts, too many. The implication being that one Negro spiritual per season was fine, but Sullivan was going overboard. He was making his show too black. And if he didn't stop, they would withdraw millions of dollars. They would bankrupt the show. One Ford executive got thrown out of the theater by Sullivan himself after suggesting he drop black performers. He physically removed him from the building. But the pressure was real. The threats were real. The economic weapon was real. And here are some specific incidents that show you how insane this was. When Sullivan kissed Pearl Bailey on the cheek during a broadcast, Southern affiliates threatened to black out the show. They threatened to cut the feed so their white audiences wouldn't see a white man kiss a black woman on the cheek. A kiss on the cheek. That was treated as a crisis. Simply shaking hands with Nat King Cole was described as daring. Shaking hands, the most basic gesture of respect and greeting, was seen as a radical act because it implied equality. You see what's happening here? The culture war of the 1950s was using economic pressure to enforce a visual segregation that the law no longer permitted. They couldn't make it illegal for black people to appear on television, so they used sponsor pressure to make it economically impossible. And when Kirk's followers boycott Disney for having gay characters, when they boycott Bud Light for using a trans influencer, when they organize pressure campaigns against any company that doesn't toe the line, they're not inventing a new tactic. They're using the same tactic the Lincoln Mercury dealers used in 1955. They're just doing segregation by other means. The erasure of Harry Belafonte. Let me tell you about Harry Belafonte real quick, because this story is important. Belafonte was blacklisted during the McCarthy era. Why? Because he was political. He didn't just sing and smile. He organized, he marched, he spoke out against injustice. He used his platform to push for civil rights, and for this, he was labeled a communist and a troublemaker. Sponsors demanded Sullivan ban him from the show. This wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum backed by millions of dollars. Sullivan said no. Not only did he say no, he booked Belafonte 10 times, and he didn't just have him sing, he let him speak. He let Belafonte explain his political positions to the audience. He gave him a platform to articulate his vision of justice. This is important because it shows what the culture war has always been about. Silencing the political black voice. If you're black and you entertain, that's fine. But if you're black and you demand rights, if you're articulate and political, if you have the audacity to not just perform but to speak, then you're dangerous. Kirk's attacks on ungrateful black figures like Michelle Obama follow this same pattern. His suggestion that Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson lacks brain processing power. His complaints about athletes kneeling during the national anthem. These are all echoes of the same desire. Black people can be here, but only if they know their place. You can be visible, but only if you're not threatening. You can speak, but only if you're saying what we want to hear. The genealogy of panic, a century of manufactured crises. Okay, now I'm going to blow your mind, because the connection between Charlie Kirk and Sullivan's critics isn't just similar, it's genealogical. It's the same playbook passed down generation to generation, like a family recipe for oppression. The culture war machine works by creating what sociologists call moral panics. Here's how it works. Society gets scared because power dynamics are shifting. Black people are getting more power. But you can't just say, we're scared black people are getting more power, because that sounds racist. So you invent a folk devil, a monster, a threat that justifies the crackdown. And you've been running this play for over a century. Let me show you the pattern. The 1910s, the Jack Johnson blueprint. The entire blueprint for the modern culture war was created in 1910. Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight boxing champion, defeated Jim Jeffries, who white people literally called the Great White Hope. And when Johnson won, riots broke out across the country. But here's the detail everyone forgets. The riots were mostly white people attacking black people who were celebrating. Black folks were just happy their guy won, and white mobs responded with violence. Yet the government blamed not the white rioters, but the film of the fight. They said showing the fight on film was dangerous because it showed black supremacy. Not supremacy in general, black supremacy specifically. The image of a black man defeating a white man was too dangerous for American eyes. So Congress passed the Sims Act in 1912, which banned the interstate transport of boxing films. The explicit purpose was to prevent the display of black supremacy. Let me make sure you understand this. When black excellence couldn't be denied in the ring, when it was too obvious to ignore, they banned the image of it. They tried to make it so people couldn't see it, because if people can't see black excellence, maybe they can forget it exists. Kirk's attack on black pilots is the same thing. When you can't deny that black people are competent, you attack the image of their competence. You make people doubt what they see. You make people suspicious of black people in positions of authority. You can't ban black pilots, but you can make everyone on the plane nervous when they see one. Same play, different century. The 1920s to 1950s, the panic over sound. Then came jazz in the 1920s and rock and roll in the 1950s, and white supremacists lost their minds. They called the music barbaric, savage, jungle rhythms. They said it was destroying American youth, corrupting morals, undermining civilization. But scholars have documented what the real fear was: miscegenation. That's the fancy word for race mixing. Jazz clubs and rock and roll concerts created integrated spaces where black and white people danced together, touched each other, enjoyed the same music, occupied the same space. And white supremacy can't function when black and white people are in the same space having a good time together, because then the lie becomes obvious. You can maintain the illusion that black people are fundamentally different when you keep them separate. But when they're dancing together, when they're laughing together, when they're enjoying the same pleasures, the humanity becomes undeniable. So they attacked the music as immoral, but morality was just camouflage for white supremacy. They weren't scared of jungle rhythms, they were scared of integration. The 1990s, the super predator hoax. Now let's jump to the 1990s. This one had academics behind it, PhDs. Politicians, including Democrats, warning about a coming generation of super predators. These were supposed to be feral black youth with no conscience, no remorse, no capacity for empathy. A wave of violence was coming that would make the crime of the 80s look tame. Except it was completely made up. Juvenile crime was falling when these warnings were being issued. The predictions were spectacularly wrong, but that didn't matter because the panic served its purpose. It manufactured consent for the 1994 crime bill, mass incarceration, trying children as adults, life without parole for teenagers. Kirk's talk about prowling blacks in cities is the same track. It dehumanizes black people to the point where state violence against them seems like pest control instead of injustice. The mechanics of the hoax, how it works. So why does this work? Why does the same scam work over and over for 115 years? How do they keep getting away with it? 3 reasons. The inversion of reality, or DARVO. First mechanism, DARVO. That stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and defender. This is a tactic documented in abuse literature, and the culture war uses it perfectly. Step 1. Deny. Kirk denies systemic racism exists. He says, racist sentiments have gone away. Racism is over. We solved it. Nothing to see here. Step 2. Attack. He attacks anyone who points out racism. They're race baiters, Marxists, divisive, anti-American. The real racists are the people talking about race. Step 3. Reverse. He claims white people are the real victims. The Civil Rights Act oppresses white people. DEI discriminates against white people. White people are the ones being replaced and persecuted. And here's why this is so powerful. It provides ontological security. It resolves cognitive dissonance. It lets white people believe they're good people while opposing civil rights. It tells them, you're not the oppressor, you're the oppressed. You're not losing privilege, you're being robbed of rights. You're not benefiting from a racist system, you're being victimized by an anti-white system. Your resentment is righteous, your fear is justified. This is psychologically powerful because it lets people feel like heroes while doing the work of villains. The economic grift. Second mechanism, the money. The culture war is a business. It's profitable. Turning Point USA raised millions of dollars every year by keeping people scared and angry. Kirk got rich. The consultants got rich. The grifters got rich. Panic drives engagement. Engagement drives donations. Donations drive more panic. It's a perpetual motion machine powered by white grievance. And the beautiful part from their perspective is you never have to solve the problem. You can't solve the problem, because if you solve it, the money stops. You need your audience constantly afraid that the sky is falling. You need them constantly angry that they're under attack. You need them constantly convinced that without your leadership, they'll be destroyed. That's the business model. The essential camouflage. Third mechanism, the camouflage. This is the genius part. The culture war never frames itself as racist. Never. It frames itself as defending values. In 1910, it was defending decency against boxing films. In 1920, it was defending morality against jazz. In 1950, it was defending standards against rock and roll. In 2025, it's defending merit against black pilots. In every instance, values is a code word for whiteness. The value being defended is white comfort, white dominance, white supremacy. But it can't say that directly because that's too obvious. So it translates into race-neutral language. We're not racist. We're just concerned about safety. We're not defending white supremacy. We're defending Western civilization. We're not against black people. We're for merit. This camouflage is essential because it provides moral cover. It lets people participate in white supremacy without confronting what they're actually defending. You can attack DEI without saying you don't want black people in positions of authority. You can oppose the Civil Rights Act without saying you want segregation. You can spread replacement theory without saying white people are inherently superior. The values language provides cover. It provides deniability. It provides the psychological comfort of believing you're fighting for principles instead of privileges. Conclusion. The end of the line? So here we are. Charlie Kirk is dead. That's a tragedy. Political violence is always a tragedy. But the narrative he spent his career building, that's a tragedy of a different kind. It's a tragedy of wasted potential, a tragedy of manufactured hate, a tragedy of a young man who could have used his platform to build bridges, using it instead to burn them. The culture war he waged was a lie, a comprehensive, carefully constructed, strategically deployed lie, but a lie nonetheless. There is no conspiracy to replace white people. Demographics change, birth rates fall in wealthy countries, people migrate for opportunity. That's history. That's not genocide. There is no plague of incompetent black pilots. The aviation system is safer than ever. There's no correlation between diversity and accidents. That's data. That's not DEI destroying America. There is no beast in the Civil Rights Act hunting white families. The act provides basic protections against discrimination. That's justice. That's not anti-white persecution. These are monsters made of smoke. They're conjured to hide the real structure of white supremacy that has shaped this country since day one. from the censorship of Jack Johnson in 1910 to the sponsor threats against Ed Sullivan in 1955 to the attacks on DEI in 2025, the story is the same. Whenever Black people achieve visibility, power, or dignity, the culture war machine roars to life, sometimes with legislation, sometimes with economic pressure, sometimes with violence, but always with the same goal: push them back into the shadows, reestablish the hierarchy, maintain the lie. Exposing this hoax requires us to look at history with clear eyes, to see Sunday best not as nostalgia, but as evidence of a battle fought and partially won, to see Charlie Kirk not as a prophet, but as a relic of a mindset that's been terrified of the future for over 100 years. The culture war is the desperate thrashing of a hierarchy that knows its time has passed. The demographics are changing, the culture is evolving. The old lies don't work as well anymore, so the warriors have to speak louder, manufacture bigger threats, push harder. But here's what they don't want you to know. The machine only runs if we let it. It runs on our participation, our fear, our willingness to believe comfortable lies instead of uncomfortable truths. It runs on our failure to see the pattern. We can turn it off. We can look at the evidence. We can remember the history. We can refuse to be manipulated by smoke monsters. We can choose truth over fear. The question is, will we?